you ever thought about what the world might be like without music? Do you ever think about what music was like hundreds of years before modern times? Well, the classical era of Western music was very important to music history because of not only its elegant style, but also because of the composers and also the composers who shaped and established it. Whether classical music may or may not be your cup of tea, understanding it might help you to understand modern music better and appreciate it more. In the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you about the musical style as well as the composers of the classical era, which lasted roughly from 1775 to 1825. Classical music is very distinct because of its simple, elegant style and also its clear structure. Many choral works, which were pieces that were intended for vocalists to sing, were very religious. In an article entitled The Classical Period, 1775 to 1825, published online by the University of Kansas, choral music is described as generally conservative. It was common for large churches to employ musicians to compose and perform music for Christian religious services every week. In addition, there were instrumental pieces that took many forms. According to European Music, a reference article updated in 2016 by AEC-CLIO, an award-winning publisher for scholarly reference materials, the sonata was the most prevalent form of instrumental music at the time. Other forms included the symphony, the concerto, and also chamber music. Different forms would imply different performance settings or locations, as well as they would specify the number of people needed to play each piece. So essentially, they were formats that music was written in. While the musical style of the classical era was very important, the people who pioneered that style were also equally as important. There were two composers who stood out among the rest when it came to classical music. Those were Franz Joseph Haydn and also Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Haydn was an Austrian composer born in 1732, which was actually way before the classical era started. He's pictured up here, just so that you can see that he's a human person rather than just a historical object from a textbook. He started working for the Esterhazy family when he was 30 years old. During this time, composers would usually be employed by noble families. He stayed there for another 30 years after that, and then he became most famous when he was in his 60s. And after he left the Esterhazy's family, he went on tours within Europe, and he also composed and conducted a total of 12 very, 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 very long symphonies. And then he spent the rest of his life mostly working on religious works for chorus. Mozart was one of the better known composers of the era. He is pictured up here. Contrary to Haydn, he gained fame at a much younger time in his life. James Van Horn Melton, a history professor at Emory University in Georgia, wrote an entry for Encyclopedia of the Early Modern World entitled Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart in 2004, in which he explains that Mozart was considered to be a musical prodigy throughout the entire continent of Europe by the time he was only 6 years old. Between the ages of 6 and 15, he toured around Europe performing and composing music. Mozart mastered just about every musical form and genre at a very young age. He wrote a large collection of pieces, including operas, symphonies, and also concertos throughout his life. Unfortunately, his work became more controversial and unpopular as he got older, and unfortunately, he died very early at the age of only 35. Why Mozart? Although the composers of the past are dead and gone, their work lives on and has shaped music of the world today. Now that I've briefly introduced you to the styles of choral and instrumental pieces of the classical era, as well as the significance of the composers like Haydn and Mozart, although the classical period was only a small fragment of time in history, it continues to be relevant to the music that we still create today. We probably can't imagine what the world would be like without music, simply because we've always had it with us. Thank you.